Okay, so as I was making this recording, I got to the point where I was going to switch my drive locations, if you guys are wondering what happened there. And my computer blue screened, and fortunately my screen recorder, when I rebooted, managed to put me right back into position, so I really didn't lose any work, which is, I'm so happy it did that. So what you're seeing on my screen right now is me trying to get back into working mode here. And I think where we left off is I went ahead and got this far. We chose the application framework. We titled it. I chose my new save location, which was going to be in my OneDrive. And actually, I'm going to, okay, that's good. Just checking. After your machine crashes, you get a little paranoid that everything you're going to do is going to make it crash. Knock on simulated wood. And yes, I recorded that. And so we're, hopefully the recording's not too weird. And now we're kind of back to where we were before. In my PDF document here, I'm navigating back to the same location where we were adding the filter. And remember, I was rebuilding the application. And we did need to add a controller, so we get to repeat the steps at least so you can reinforce them. You guys watching the video obviously probably don't need to do this. You're probably like, what's this teacher's problem? And I hope you chuckle to that a little bit. Alright, and then we had added our filter right here above the index method. And we also changed the index method to do a string output and to return a string with a message. I'm just going to type in filters demo right now, just as long as we know it's what we created. And then the intent is to launch it. Now, given the fact that I'm saving it to a new location, I'm anticipating no problems. And I did run into this last year at this time when I was teaching this class as well. And at that time, it took me a little while to figure out why it was happening, because I didn't realize that the Google Drive file stream, the enterprise version, doesn't cache things locally. And with all luck, this will work. If I blue screen again, then it really, I'll have some concern. Okay, so it looks like it's working just fine. Yay. Okay, let's go home. Okay. That's kind of what it feels like sometimes, you know, when you get that far. All right, so the next thing that we need to do is make a little bit of an adjustment here. And I have the tutorial, remember, on my second screen. And, you know, frankly, this output is cached, so it'll stay there for 15 seconds. So here's the intent of what is going to go on here. If I had something that was dynamically changing on the screen, and I went to refresh it once this came up, for 15 seconds of refresh attempts, nothing new would load on the screen, even if the content on the server changed. And that the reason people do that is to basically take a little bit of a load off their server. So if somebody is like really impatiently like, well, I don't see what I want yet, refresh, 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 refresh. You know, you're not like trying to process all of those requests. Now, why do developers do that? Because frankly, if you think about an application that might do server-side interactions, is processing code on the server, and for each one of those requests might be reading and writing to a database, that could really be problematic. Probably more so for the database than the application. So, you know, the way that we can really demonstrate this working is by now setting up an additional method in the application. So you can close your browser window or go back to Visual Studio or hit the stop button, either way. The only way we're really going to see this in action is if we get our application to put some sort of real-time data up on the screen so that we can see that there's, that it's actually working. So one way that we can do that is we can add the method shown at the bottom of page 48, which is to display the current time on the screen. So if you have the PDF handy on your screen, you can copy and paste this stuff all in. So I'm going to go ahead and just do that. And of course it puts it all in one line, which looks not too good. So I'm going to lay it out in the fashion that Visual Studio does. Now you'll notice another thing happening here. So notice the second filter being thrown in. And this one has a separate cache, which is set for 20 seconds. Now, at first you guys might go like, why would you set one for 15 and another one for 20? Well, there's purpose behind this. Now notice this method that we've put in here. It's just, once again, we'll output a string, and it's called getCurrentTime. And then if you guys remember your basic VB or C#, if you ever delved into it much, here's a really basic little method. It just pulls the current system time and converts it to a string and then puts it up on the screen. All right, now they want us to go ahead. Oh, there's another change I think I missed here. We want to go ahead and load this up again. It will go to our index page. But remember, this is our home controller. And in order to trigger that method, we can add to our URL, once it loads, home get current time, and then that method will load up. So this one, even if we count 15 seconds and refresh, what's it going to load? It's going to load the same thing, right? But if we load the other method, so we call the controller, and then we call the method. That's going to put the time on the screen. I'm counting 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I'm doing a refresh. No change in time. 11, 12. Well, I got to start over again, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. That's 10 seconds. 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. Now I'm going to refresh, and you see the time has updated. If I go to refresh it again, no change, no change, no change. And the question you might have is, do I need to wait to start counting again? And the answer is actually no.
What's the answer?
No. You don't have to wait to start counting again. So probably about now, I'm thinking it's probably okay if I refresh again. I think it's been about 20 seconds. And now I have a fresh time up there. So once again, the reason we do this in applications is to not allow the user to overburden the server, right? The sad thing is there are people that are malicious out there that do these weird attacks on websites. One of them is to go to a site and simply overburden requests to the server, the web server, and to the database. And they write these little JavaScript things, and if you're not like filtering out your input boxes like we talked about last time, and you can drop JavaScript into like a dialog box and they can get it to trigger, they could put in a thing that ran an infinite loop that every 10 milliseconds did a request to the server, and you know what? Bring the server down. And that's like, those are attack techniques. And that's why they build these tools in to filter that stuff out. This is another way that we can kind of limit a hacker's capability to maliciously mess with the system. But if you also think about it from the standpoint of a database, especially if you are writing information to the database, the act of writing the information can take time. And a database record is locked while the writing is happening and being changed. And then once that record is written, then it's released again. So a lot of developers just by default will put in an output cache whenever there is database interaction, just to maintain database integrity. So these are just like little considerations to think about as you're building.
Before you close that, I have a question.
Sure.
In the URL, I get that the get current time is calling the method.
Yes.
What does the home relate to?
The home controller.
But why doesn't it have to say home controller? Why does it just say home?
That's the convention. So the question was, Phil's listening to the video, the question was, we understand why a get current time is calling the method, but how come we're just calling home and not home controller?
So it knows to only parse the beginning?
Exactly. Because it's a
To the word
controller?
controller?
Yes.
Okay.
It's built into the structure. It makes for clean URLs.
Was
But-
that anywhere in the text anywhere? Was that?
No, but I'm explaining it.
No, I was just wondering how I missed that.
Maybe it was, but maybe it was like so in passing. And it's just another one of those convention over configuration things. And a lot of, architectures that use MVC as a building approach have that type of convention. It might not be exactly the .NET approach, but they'll have their own version of it.
The reason, so it knows by convention then too, to look for the home controller and look for the index method
Yeah,
when you just launch it.
we want to try something interesting. In some circumstances, because the home controller is the default controller, sometimes I can just do this and it will work as well. But you have to make sure that you have the route for it. Remember, we learned that last week.
I say logically that it makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, go ahead and close the application from running.
So, I'm sorry, one more question.
Sure.
So if you by default didn't call it home controller, you called it home page?
Yeah, home page controller, then you would have to say home page.
Right, okay.
Yeah. Good question, though. Right, the next, we're at the bottom of page 49 now in the document, and it's talking about the fact that you can actually build custom filters for your application too. And they have basically two different classes that you can pull in to kind of build for it. And it says that it runs off of both the iAction filter and iResult filter interfaces, which all come from the base filter class. And here's one of these weird things in this book. I'm going to bring this back over. Most of the times that they ask us to actually perform an action, they have it listed as a step. But sometimes, like right here, this is actually a step, folks, right here, what I'm highlighting. And it's kind of easy to miss because it's not marked as a step. But I'm telling you it's a step, okay? So please follow along. So we're going to go perform this function here, action if you will. All right, so it says add one class for which right-click on Actions Filters folder and select Add Action Class. So where is that?
You gotta make a folder now.
Yeah, you have to create a new folder, and I probably should have, you can create a custom filter by creating a new folder in your project with the name of Action Filters, and I'm highlighting that in my PDF because I didn't do it last time. I try to highlight those things so I remember them in the future. So I'm going to come into my application. I'm going to go to the root, right click. I'm going to go ahead and add a new folder. We're going to call that Action Filters, spelled correctly. And then once we have that in place, I'm going to go ahead and right click that and choose add. And instead of choosing controller this time, we want to add a class. Now, I always recommend if it's listed in this quick list, just choose it, right? And it is, but it's way at the bottom. Easy to miss. All right. make sure class is selected, C# is your language, and then name the filter, and they're having us call it my log action filter. My log action filter. You can add the file extension if you want. If you don't, it will do it automatically. I've always tended with interfaces like that is I'm not always trusting of the software, and I usually type it in. That's just me. That's like an old school habit. You guys probably shouldn't worry about that. All right, go ahead and click Add, and then you have a brand new class file. Now, because we are going to be adding, basically our own custom actions here, we also need to make sure that we have all the libraries available that will allow us to do this work. So the default libraries for working with MVC, the 4 using statements at the top, are already included. So like whenever you're doing any MVC work, you need these, at least these 4. However, if you notice on page 50, the little diagram at the bottom, they also have 2 additional using statements, or is it 3? I actually see 3. So I see these 2, and I'm going to add them manually. Although I will tell you that if you type in commands that require them, like most good IDEs, Visual Studio will actually go in there and throw them in. I'm also kind of a big fan of throwing them in the same order. I'm not really sure if it's anything but alphabetical, but there it is. So we added System Diagnostics, System Web MVC, and System Web Routing, all of which we're going to use here. All right, we're going to make some adjustments to the code. Now the adjustments extend over a couple of pages. So our task right now is to take all that code, and so I'll just pull it over so you guys can watch me do the copy paste for as, boring as that may be. But because this spans 2 pages, you kind of have to do it in little pieces. You could type this in if that's really what you want to do. I'm not going to prevent you from doing that, but I'm going to tell you what, why bother is kind of my thinking. But I am going to be really careful with how I proceed, because it is pretty easy to make mistakes when you're copying code from alternate locations. Remember, one thing that you'll always watch for is whenever there's any quotes, double quotes or single quotes, that you're not pulling in the smart versions of them. And Visual Studio should flag it for you, but they're kind of easy to miss. All right, I'm going to add the extend statement. So whenever you see a class statement in C# followed by a colon and then a listing of something, what we're doing is we're extending this class by bringing in all the capabilities of the action filter attribute class. So really what we're doing is we're creating a child class to the parent class action filter attribute. So we're pulling in all those capabilities with that simple thing. That's called inheritance, right? We're inheriting all the capabilities of this other class. And that's really the beauty of this type of programming. All right. Next thing that we want to do is we want to start throwing in some methods here. So the first one that they're putting in is this public override void on action executing statement. That's a mouthful. And I'm going to copy that in, and I know the rest of it is down below. I want to make sure I'm inside that closing curly brace, and then I'm just going to go ahead and paste it in. Now I'm going to scroll down to the next page, and there's my curlies with the statement. So we'll throw those in. It put it all on one line, doesn't matter, but if you want to match the layout, feel free.
Doesn't your public override have to be up in the curly braces above it?
I can check that. So, oh yes, you're absolutely right, Brenda. You're right. This whole method needs to be inside the public class. Good catch. See, that's why I have students setting me straight here. Because it's, I'm talking about like it's easy to make mistakes when you copy paste, and here I am making a mistake. Right? So if your teacher's making a mistake and you make a mistake, don't feel bad. That's kind of the point. It's fixable. You'll notice right now that log is underlining. So I'm not going to jump on a potential fix quite yet, but we'll take a look. If it doesn't go away with the rest of the copy pasting that we're put in, that means that there's an issue. But at the same time, you guys should recognize that that's a method call, because what follows it is inside parentheses, so perhaps we're creating it later, right? That's why you don't go into panic mode and follow the quick fix guide. Paste in all the code first, and then we'll deal with the issue. So I'm grabbing the next method. This one also, just matching the layouts, make it look like the book. And you don't have to do that. And I'm going one at a time, but truth is I could grab them more succinctly and do them all at once, right? And I'm sure you guys are already pretty keen on that. So I grabbed a couple this time instead of one. I heard somebody say, "Oh boy."
Yeah.
All right, and then down here at the bottom, finally, is our log method, which we've been calling over and over, but now we actually have it up on the screen. I'm going to clean that one up because I want you to be able to see what it's doing. So we're just setting up each statement on a separate line. All right, so we'll get the code in, and then we're going to go through and review what it's actually doing. So we were having a few issues here in class with some of the copy pasting. So a couple of the real common things that were happening is in some cases we didn't have this piece pasted in, so it causes a lot of red underlines. The other piece is if you're copying and pasting from this document, it's tempting to just try to click select and scroll down and keep selecting. But if you notice, it also selected the page number. It just makes for a mess, and that just breaks all your code. It's better when the code is split across pages, just take your time and build it slowly, and then go back and double check to make sure that everything matches up. Now I have a little bit more experience obviously than you guys doing this, including working off of this document, so I kind of anticipate some of the errors. But remember, if you do see errors, don't freak out. Try to logically step through it and always work top down. Always work top down. Another thing you want to check when you do these copy pastes is whenever you're copy pasting in quotes, just make sure that there's the straight up and down kind and not on an angle, whether they're single or double quotes, because that will break your code too. Those are called smart quotes that you get from a word processor. I know there's a few instances of that in this book, so just be careful. Usually you can spot them as they come in because all the color coding will break. If you did it correctly, your code should look like what's up on screen here. So what I'll do for those that watching the video at home, here's the top half of the code, pause the video, type it all in. All right, here's the bottom half of the code, pause the video, type it all in. And that way you have it all set up. But that's what it should look like when you're all set. All right. Now that we got it all put into place, now it's time to actually take a look at what we created here. Right? So we did all this work just to get the code in, but what does it all mean? Right? So that's kind of an important piece, I think. So we're pulling in a bunch of methods that are pre-created. They're all part of this action filter attribute class, and we're leveraging that pre-built library to build our own. So notice what it's going to do here. It says on action executing, on action executed, and then that repeats, right? And then whenever an action is going to happen, basically this is what's going to go on. It's going to basically pull in whether or not it worked or not, and then it's going to log it to a file. So how is it going to log it? and it's actually not to a file. We set up a bunch of variables that are going to pull in what controller it's going to, what action it is, and then we're going to put that into a string format along with the method name and controller name, and then you know what this does? Write line, it writes to the console. Right. And and this technique is exactly how people create log files for applications. And you know what? It's considered good practice when you write a higher level program, a big application, to have some sort of logging built in so you can see when things go wrong. In this case, we're writing it to the console, but it's not much of a further step to actually write it to a file or to a database. So most big web applications do this sort of thing because it's considered, a trace. So if something breaks, you can go in there and say, well, what was happening at the time that made this break? Okay. So even if you don't exactly understand the code above, really what we're doing is reacting to anything that happened within the application where it's we asked for something to happen and then the result fortunately happened, we hope, and then it logs all that. And you'll see it in the console as we go. So that was the first step. We still have another piece we have to put in place to make this work, which is on the next page here. So scrolling down, we have to go back to our home controller, which you hopefully should still have on the screen, and we have to throw in a few things. So first of all, we need to call the filter that we created for ourselves. We want to run this filter on top of the home controller, so every time the home controller is called, it's going to log the activity. So this is not an atypical type of thing to do. So I'm going to copy that. Notice where it is, directly above the class statement. So I'm just going to add a line and paste it in. Okay. Don't worry about the red underline yet. There's a reason for that. You know what the reason is? Take a look at the top line here. The using statement now that we're going to add in, and you can copy and paste this in. Let me show you a different approach though. I'm hovering over it. It's a red underline. Like, if you're new to this stuff, you're like in panic mode because it's, oh my God, what's happening? It's red. It's bad. But you hover, and Visual Studio really tries to help you with this, and it says, you can't find it, blah, 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 namespace isn't there, whatever it's saying. But notice that it also has a thing that says show potential fixes. And notice there's also shortcut keys that go with that, right? So Alt-Enter or Control plus period will trigger the thing. You can also go to this little thing right here, and that's really easy to miss if you've never done this in Visual Studio before. And you can hit the drop down on it, and notice what it does. And notice that the first suggestion is the right suggestion. It recognizes that this resource exists in your project, and all you have to do is come down here and click it. And then you go up to the top and it's there. So you could copy paste it in, right? Because it's in the book, so it should work. But at the same time, if you're like Javier, who decided to name it something different, and this is one reason why you might not want to do that, if you copy the code from the book, it's going to have a different using statement, right, Javier?
Yeah.
And in which case you want to use the automatic tool, or you go in and start typing it by hand. My advice to students is, you learn coding kind of a long hat way where you're manually doing everything all the time. But here you have this really powerful tool, and the powerful tool exists, to make your work better. And I think the analogy I used last week was like, you can go to the dollar store and buy a hammer, or if you're like a professional that does like framing or roofing, you go out and you buy the, the $60 roofing hammer because that's the right one. That's the one that actually works, And then when you really get, you get your skills up there, you get into Visual Studio and you buy, the one that plugs into the air compressor and it's like a nail gun and it's like, and you're done, right? That's the equivalent here. So that's the way you got to think. And it also helps you to not make mistakes. But you have to know how to leverage a tool. And then when you see the potential fixes, you have to be intelligent enough to understand which is the right one. So kind of a combination of things. All right, let's do the next edits here. So the Index method, that basically is remaining unchanged. My text is different, but, oh, notice, hey, wait, they changed the duration to that to 10 seconds in this one. I'm not sure why. All right, you know what? I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to change mine to 10. There's no real functional reason I can think of that they're doing it, unless they're trying to make a point. Maybe they don't want to wait so long. Change the get current time output cache to 10 seconds as well. And that's really, the major change was the fact that you're pulling in the filter here. So you can create your own filters. They're just class files, add a using statement, and then you can call it in. All right, I think the next step is to run the application. Now notice what it says here. Run the application and then observe the output window in Visual Studio. Now for those of you who are dual screening it, and I recommend that if you can at all afford to do that, you can split this on separate screens. In fact, that's usually how I prefer to work when I do development work. It's like whatever my my coding screens are usually different than my output screens. Also, food for thought for many of you that most people tend to use laptops to do development work these days. Who buys a desktop anymore except for gamers and nerds, basically, right? But if you're looking for a second screen, you don't have to run out to Best Buy and buy a brand new screen for like $200, $300, $400. You plug into your TV set, or that old monitor that you decided wasn't any good and you were going to give it to Goodwill. Well, either you plug that in, with VGA, even if the resolution's lower, so what? You can see the output. Or heck, go to Goodwill and buy a $10 monitor and plug it in. Doesn't have to be anything fancy. Most of our laptops will either have a VGA output or a HDMI or both. Of course, if you use an older monitor, you want to use VGA, but it's just a handy little tip. Okay, so I'm going to pull my PDF out of the way. I'm going to go ahead and run this. All right. Remember, running it also saves all your files. And I'm going to let the thing come up on the screen. And then I'm going to do a little bit of little side-by-siding here. So we're waiting for it to load still, but then we are going to watch the output screens as we go. And you'll notice that there's several different panels that pop up in Visual Studio. Okay, we did see that it loaded, right? But I'm not really seeing a whole lot of action here. But there's an output tab in this little panel. That's the one that you want. Now here's where it gets kind of interesting. And what you might want to do is this. You might want to expand that output window and then take a look at what it did. Do you notice how it's like, well, Visual Studio logs a whole bunch of stuff anyhow, right? But for us, the moment we ran the application and it's actually running, notice that our action filter log pops up on which controller and which method, so it's the index method, and it goes through and it shows you that it did what work it did and that it succeeded or failed or whatever it did. So now we know that if we go to our application window here and add to the URL home get current time, it's still in my my short list here. I'm just going to trigger that. Watch the output window. Did you see it change? Yeah, it sure did. In fact, it added this text here, and I highlighted it on purpose so that when I come back here, now that, remember our output cache is set for 10 seconds. I've probably already been blabbing for 10 seconds, so I can do a refresh again. Oh, you got to make sure you do it here, not in Visual Studio. And then you can see it added some more. So that's the kind of thing, frankly, folks, that experienced developers do very regularly. Is they do these kind of like console writes or writing directly to a file, and then you have some sort of a indication of what's going on in your application. I think it's really powerful, really powerful. So you might perhaps scratch your head a little bit and say, well, why am I ever going to use that? Well, you might not use it now because the kind of stuff that we do here at Gateway, we're not building a big application that's public facing that does a lot of interactions, but you're learning how the technology works. And I assure you that output caching is really important. Creating custom filters is important. Learning how to log your program interactions is very useful, especially when troubleshooting. And I think that, those of you that went to the advisory board meeting saw our advisors talk about how important it was to test your applications. Like, they don't release any applications without testing, and part of the testing process is looking at your logs too. So it's just good practice. And that actually completes section 9. I think we're going to take a break right now here in class. So let's do that. Let's take a break. All right, we're going to move on to section 10 now, and just a little fair warning, you don't need to start a new application for this section, at least not quite yet. This one's going to focus on another technology within this architecture called selectors. Now, the thing that is interesting here is that there's basically 3 types of these selectors, or these attributes that we can throw in, and they fit into these categories. So the action name, non-action, interesting, or action verbs, and they kind of break them down by category. So the first category here says this represents an attribute that is used for the name of an action, so therefore it's called action name. And I know they have a little example here. So they're taking a look at what they did in the previous chapter, and they say, okay, look at this home controller. We have 2 action methods within it, and with one, we basically are just returning a string, okay? But, well, actually, with both of them, we're just returning strings, so they're not really doing anything aside from, being called and returning a simple string. But the action name selector, and that's like my highlight there, is get current time. And so that allows us to do some control over how the application is run. But notice that we can also switch it to this other syntax that looks a lot like a filter with the square brackets. So we can throw that in, and in fact, why don't you go ahead and do that. Grab that thing, and the functionality of this is actually pretty simple. I'm struggling a little bit trying to get my I-beam to behave as an I-beam. There it goes. And then we're going to drop that into our Visual Studio Code. So we're going to be in the home controller. And that's going to go right above get current time. Now you notice that they're removing the output cache things. So the question I'll get, of course, is, do I have to remove the cache? What are your guesses? Well, the book doesn't have them there, right? But I'm going to tell you what, you can still leave them in if you want. I'm going to just go ahead and just remove the one for get current time right now. Oops. Gotta go back and recopy this now. Okay, so I had 2 very good guesses here about what this might do. But it's really kind of giving us a different way to call the same thing. Because notice that we called our method get current time. This is going to allow us to actually reference it by just saying current time. You see what's going on?
So like an intelligence thing?
Sort of. It's giving us another way to enter or call the method. It's a little bit shorter. I mean, it's not that much shorter, I mean, functionally, but maybe if you just called it time.
It's similar to my log action filter, isn't it? Calling it the same. That's a short way to call the filter.
That's a short way to call the filter. This is actually an action name, so we're just giving it kind of an alias, basically, is kind of how I think of it.
So you call current time from some other place, but it would reference that.
Right, it would actually trigger this method to run. All right. I don't know if they jump right to the running it. They sure do. So let's just go ahead and run it. I know we have all the output filters or the log filters are still on there. You know what? That's just fine. Let's let it load. Okay, so it's up and running. And what you should do to experiment with this is first, you can still use the full URL to bring in the current time. So try that, make sure that still works. Oh, hey, wait. Is yours not working also?
Mine's working. Mine's just current time.
With the short one or the old one?
Short one.
The short one. Right, so if I get rid of this piece and just put in current time, oops, you guys can make sure your URL is right. Am I doing it wrong, or do I have to have home in there?
Oh, you might need, yeah, you need home.
Yeah, you do need home, because you still have to call the controller. So really, what we're doing here is we can call a method one thing, give it an alias, so to speak, but then notice that the original version of the name isn't working, at least not for me. Try the original version of the name and see if it's working.
Oh, yeah, it doesn't work for me.
It's not, right? So functionally what we've done is we've renamed it. You know, if you want to like kind of get funny with this, if that's your intent, I suppose, go ahead and relaunch. Right, so you get the point? Okay. So ideally it would kind of match up, but you can really call it whatever. It's a very bad joke. And one that I've worn out way too much. So, but I think that gives you the kind of the impetus of what you can do here. So I'm actually just going to keep mine that way. Could I put the output cache back on here? You know what, let's try it. And then I put it, can I do two filters? These are the kind of questions you should be asking yourself, because that's what I ask myself. How do you find out? Well, you could just try it. All right. Still have to type in home. Oops, not what I meant to type. If I refresh, I think it's been about 10 seconds, right? So you can stack them. You can have multiple filters.
And it knows because that comes before the method, that's the action name for that method.
Correct. Isn't that interesting? Pretty simplistic.
Yeah.
Almost too simplistic, you know.
That's right. It's like the person that can't be that simple.
You know, that is by design, that it's that simplistic. All right, so this next one, the non-action says, it's another built-in attribute which indicates that a public method of a controller is not an action method. Gotcha. It is not an action method. It is used when you want a method that shouldn't be treated as an action method. So they have an example here. And let's see what their Okay, so they're leaving the action name of current time. And then I've highlighted all the stuff that's different here, so that's the stuff you want to copy over. You catching that? So we're going to have, for me it's going to be whatever, but you guys it'll be current time. Call a separate method. So let's go ahead and copy that code in. So I'm going to change that. So time string is what we're going to call it. Let's make sure you stop your application from running too, so you can make your edits. So instead of actually directly returning it, we're going to copy that over. And that will necessitate the creation of a new one. I'm going to manually type this in, folks. So non-action without spaces. And then we're going to do a public string. And we're going to call it time string. Curly's. And then you can go ahead and return the time. I'm trying to see if I can copy this here. All right, if you've done the change, go ahead and run it again. And of course we have to call, I'm calling whatever, you guys are calling current time. And so you see that it did call it incorrectly. Now the question is does the output cache work? Still works. Did you catch that? Didn't work. Probably about 10 seconds about now. Now it's working. Yes, I'm sorry. Here's my code. Make sure that you gotta call it from here. It's not working. So we're using an action name kind of as an alias to run a method, which then calls another method to actually do the work. Now the interesting thing about this is, the next instruction, so this is the top of page 58. With the application still running, instead of, whatever you called yours, current time, I'm calling mine whatever, try calling that other method directly, time string. It won't pull it up. If you try to pull it up directly, it will not, because it is a non-action method. Okay, can anybody think of a scenario where you'd want to do this?
In case, not hackers, like SQL injection, like they're trying to find our action.
Right. Very, very, very astute. So it's another security approach where instead of, because really what you're doing here in your URL is you're kind of revealing what your methods are, right? Your controllers and your methods, so you're kind of revealing the structure of your application. So you're having the one alias of a method to call the method, which calls a different method, so they can never directly attack the method. So it's kind of a clever little way of doing it. So that's a pretty astute observation. All right, next section is action verbs. What's fascinating about action verbs is this. First of all, when you learn about creating web pages, very often you work with forms, right? And when you learn how to work with forms, you quickly learn about the fact that when you're passing data to a server, you can do it two different ways. One is in the form of what we call a get, and one is in the form of what we call a post. So just kind of do a really quick refresh on an example. Yes, exactly. These do match up to the CRUD operations, but get and post are our most common HTTP actions. So for example, if I go to Google and I just, I type, okay, ASDF, this is actually going to get results, right? Those are the keywords. There's a series of videos. You guys should watch them. They're very funny. But when I do a search in Google, what Google does, if you look up here, is it triggers their search application, and then it goes after the question mark here, it goes into a format of key value pairs for a bunch of information, and ultimately, if you kind of look through here somewhere, is actually my search terminology of ASDF, right? So I can see exactly what the Google application is passing back to its server to trigger the server to do whatever it's doing. That's in the form of a get. It's in plain text in the URL. When I do a post, like I'm hoping when I put my credit card into like Amazon or whatever to buy something, that it's posting it, because the last thing I want is somebody looking at my URL and figuring out my card number and expiration date and all that stuff. So when you use HTTP post, or when you set a form to do a method of post, the data is sent, but it is obscured. It is not included in the URL. That's the functional difference of those two. And I think, a lot of people do know that, but this is just a reminder that whenever you do a get for a form, it's visible as plain text. The really scary thing is, I think back to the early days of the web, and companies like Yahoo would offer you to log into their service insecurely through HTTP, yep, believe it or not, and the password would just go right through the URL in the form of a get. It didn't take a long time before they switched, right? But for a long time they offered you secure sign-in or regular sign-in, and old timers will know what I'm talking about, but young people go, what? And now there's not a site out there that isn't pushing HTTPS to do just about everything. In fact, this is a visible URL in the browser, so if somebody's looking over your shoulder, they can see exactly what you typed to get that. But it is being transmitted securely with HTTPS. Interestingly, I just read an article that Google will start enforcing in the Chrome browser soon, if they haven't already, that if you have a site that's got mixed content, so some of the content is being encrypted in transit and some of it is not, any site that allows unencrypted stuff on a HTTPS page will not be allowed to show in Chrome. And what Google is functionally doing is saying that, okay, people with bad coding habits, guess what? We're not going to allow this anymore. I think it's really important for you guys as web people to know that, because that's like the #1 browser. Right? So, and that happens a lot when you go to like sites that have a lot of third-party interactions. So like you go to like a newspaper site and they're loading all these tracking cookies and advertising and JavaScript and Google Analytics and God knows what else in the background keeping track of you, that even though it's an HTTPS website, it might not all be encrypted traffic. So that's a pretty key distinction. Yeah, but do watch those videos. They're very funny. All right, so some of the other additional verbs that you might not be familiar with are put, delete, options, and patch. And these do directly relate to the CRUD operations that we see in a database. So CRUD operations being create, retrieve, update, and destroy, or delete. And, okay, so which is which then? Put, what do you think put is? Create. Okay. What do you think delete is? Well, delete. What is patch? Update. And what do you think retrieve is?
Recover.
Well, get and post are both retrieves, technically. So I think it's kind of fascinating. Of course, option sends additional data, but these are action verbs, and you know what? We can leverage all of those for our applications. Now, you have to like functionally understand what they do. And now notice we're going to be creating an employee controller for our application. Okay. Now, the funny thing is with the steps here, once again, they're not listing these as steps. So easy to miss without my guidance. You might want to highlight that. So we will create the employee controller. So how do you create an employee controller, folks?
Right click, go to controller folder, add, just either I guess empty, I don't know.
Yep, that's absolutely correct. Make sure you terminate your application from running. You can go over to your controllers folder, give it a right click, choose add, create a controller. We're going to create an empty one. They're not giving us any steps here. Do you notice that? That's why you have me. Go ahead and choose empty, give it a name, and choose add. All right, now we're going to need to do a little bit of work. So now I have some interesting notes here. So when I teach this from semester to semester, I'm trying not to hide all my background apps, but I just did by shaking this. There we go. Notice my little note. This disappears below, so why is it here? So, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and type it in anyhow. But they want us to replace whatever content is here. You notice there's no index method here. The default action for the employee controller will be to search for the name of an employee as a parameter that we're going to throw in. All right, so grab that code.
What page are you on?
The page I am on currently is top of page 59. All right, so I'm going to paste that stuff into Visual Studio. I'm going to replace the action method. Okay, I'm not sure what. I'm deleting it. Now I'll paste it separately, I guess. I couldn't paste over it, is what that message was about. Because I think it thought, hey, why are you deleting the index method? Okay, so here's a beautiful example, folks. Take a look at this. Look at the quotes. These are smart quotes. Notice them? The curls. So if you're using that, change them, delete them, and replace them with real double quotes, which are straight up and down. So basically, the intent of this method is so that from the URL, you can call this controller, append to it the name of an employee, and then it'll pull back the results for it. And right now, what it would do is, well, essentially nothing. It doesn't have the mechanism to do anything because it's calling, notice, another method. So we have to add that method into the mix. All right, I'm going to scroll down in the book, so I'm at the bottom of page 59, going on to 60. All right, and this is a really, I'll tell you what, this is a really goofy example. I'm going to show you what they're doing here. So if you look at the book, all right, so we have the Notice the index method is commented out, right? So I'm not sure if they're going to make us bring it back. And then they have the search method in there. Notice the string is now removed. You guys catching that? And then they have another one that's identical. So it's a little confusing. But I'm going to match it up because they're doing this for a reason. They're trying to actually demonstrate a concept to you. So first of all, let's get rid of this extra string information. We kind of knew we were going to do it anyhow, so. All right. And then we're going to copy in the one from the top of the next page, which is top of page 60. And we're going to paste that one in as well. Now right away, you guys should notice that now, excuse me, I have two methods called search. One has one parameter that's being passed. The other one does not. So one will take data from the form and one will not. Now the question for you guys is this. What is that technique called? You guys remember this? It's an overload, right? So we're setting up a method with the same name that can basically accept either no parameters or one parameter. So if I don't send any information to it, it's going to basically output another search action. That's kind of the intent here. However, they are pointing out that if you run this, and you don't have to, okay, I'm just saying, if you run this, it says it will give you an error because the MVC framework is unable to figure out which action method should be picked up for the request. Okay. But now it's saying that we need to set it up so that it responds to a get. So we haven't done that, right? The get is implied, but it's not specified. So here's where we use another selector now in order to be able to make it happen. So if you go down to the middle of page 60, you'll notice that for the second one, this one, they're adding above it this selector, which is HTTP GET. Right there. Easy to miss, but that's being added in. So now let's go ahead and save your work, whatever, and run it. Take a moment to load up. Once it loads, go ahead and append to the URL the new controller that we created, right? Employee. All right. So we got an error already. Why? You guys should say, I don't know, you're the teacher, you should tell me.
Because it recognized that it was we were directly doing it into the URL, and it was not because of the program.
Right, that's exactly correct. So it's knowing that we're not putting the information in there correctly. However, it should. Now the problem is we don't have an index method that will respond directly. So really what we should be appending here is search. Now we get it up on the screen. Now if I append to that, so there's kind of a typo in the book if you're following that, I guess is the point. And I type in a name. So if I type in like Tom, okay, and press enter, now what does it do? We're not doing a darn thing because we don't have a method for it that really is like processing that input. Try it again. Nothing. Now a question you should ask is why? What if I add that HTTP GET above this one as well. Because you know, when I'm typing the parameters and stuff into the action method up top, it's expecting that, you know, we're going to add that value in order to be able to trigger this. So let's try the search first. Oh, now it's totally horribly broken. You guys do this same thing too? This, can we all be consistent? Okay. What if I append to the end of it, Tom? Still no go.
Is it telling you in the error message that it says it's ambiguous between the two methods?
Right, that's exactly it. It doesn't know which one to pick because I put gets on both of them. It doesn't like it when you do this. It is basically the point and what I'm trying to demonstrate. So don't put that on both. All right. Believe it or not, that actually completes section 10, which you know, I was kind of hoping to get to section 11 tonight, but that doesn't look like it's going to happen. But at least we got through these two sections, and I think this video will end right here.